Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here in my dark wormery, and as you can see I've got some Christmas lights hung up. I was given some of these lights because it's from my stepsister. She didn't like the LED appearance of it. I think it's the color, temperature, maybe they're just too cool. I think she likes a warmer reddish color. These might be a little too blue or something. And if you look at them, they have this kind of weird, like that LED flicker kind of appearance to them. So I was like, yeah, give them here, I'll take them. I'll put them to use. So I got 2 strings of these. They're not very long, but I did take one of them and I set it up over here in the darkness. I blocked off the window to keep things dark in here because I set this up last night, and this is one of the bins that I have on the agenda for feeding today. These are one of my African nightcrawler systems. This is the older of the 2. I'm going to feed 2 nightcrawler systems today. But for this one, I thought I would set up this little time-lapse because I've got that GoPro, that old GoPro camera set up over there. And it's doing a time-lapse, 1 frame every minute. And I've always been curious about what happens underneath the plastic. When I put the plastic down, you know, I know there's always worms there, basking in the recirculating moisture that gets captured under the plastic. But I figured if I used a clear sheet of thin plastic bag, maybe we'd be able to get a little view of what happens under the plastic over the course of multiple hours. So to try to gently illuminate the scene so as to not scare the worms away, I set up this nifty little light reflector thing. It's one of the 2 strings of lights that I received, wrapped up in there, and maybe with that mirror reflective surface, we're effectively maybe doubling the amount of light that light source gives off. So I just wanted to set this up really quick so that we could take a peek at how things are looking underneath the plastic. So this is the footage that you see, and it's pretty interesting, you know. I mean, the moisture clearly pulls up underneath the plastic in the form of water vapor. It just sort of fogs up a little bit, and then you could certainly see some activity going on under there. I just thought I would set this up last night really quick, you know, just to see if the camera's in a reliable state still, since it is a pretty old camera, and whether this form of light would turn out nicely in the video, or if it would have some sort of a weird result from the flickeriness of it or its color temperature. So just a couple things I wanted to test out here, and I figured this would be an interesting subject. But it's time to take all this apart and feed the worms in here. So let's get to work. Some of the food that they're going to be getting is this. So the leftover rice, and no, those are not peas in there. It's mold. This stuff started getting moldy a couple days ago already, and I've just been forgetting to feed it to the worms. It's definitely got a good moldy smell to it too. The worms are going to get a kick out of that. And the rest of the stuff they're getting is just your typical assortment of frozen kitchen scraps, mostly banana peels and cuttings from making salads, even part of a bruised apple. All kinds of yummy stuff for them. So here's the clear plastic covering that we used to try to gain some visibility into the action under the plastic. Usually the plastic I'm using is sort of translucent. It's that red plastic bag. I've got it right here. We'll use that to cover up with at the end. It's a little bit bigger than this. This was just a clear plastic bag that I took and I cut it to make it into a single layer to give us as much visibility through it as possible. But it was a little bit glary and a little bit, you know, hard to see through. But what was most clear was how the water vapor condensed right onto the plastic almost immediately after it was put on there. And then soon after, the worms came up to get it. And that seems to be the dynamic when you put a plastic covering over your worm bins. Luckily, it looks like none of the things that we're pulling out of here to get them out of our way have worms on them. We do have one worm hanging out here to greet us. I think with that clear plastic, and now that I've opened up the The window, I took the covering off the window to let the daylight in. I've turned the lights on. It's a much brighter scene here, and through that clear plastic without anything to keep them protected from these bright lights, I think the worms, for the most part, tried to dive down out of view. Wow, look at that. So these, from what I remember, this was a coffee filter that I tore down the middle here. So this was where it was ripped in half. I don't know if it's just upside down. That's where we would see the matching segments, if I'm correct. Something like that. I don't remember. But I only put this in here a couple weeks ago, and you could see the missing outer edge of the perimeter. And on this one, there was diatomaceous earth, but it's gone. It just went with the paper, I guess. So I had placed some diatomaceous earth out here, and in the hopes that maybe it would catch some insects. So even though the other one has been cleared of it, this one still has a good amount in it. And sometimes I think I've at times in the past done little tests of, dumping this stuff onto the bugs and then watching them suffer. It's terrible, I know. Shouldn't do that sort of stuff. All right, so whatever. I was just thinking I'd pick through some of this paper, any paper I could find, because it was kind of a theme that I started last week already, where I figured I would just sift through the material rapidly, looking for any sort of scraps that I could use to supplement the bedding under the feedings. In the case of bins like these, the ones we're feeding today that are over 100 days in age, at that point, I like the idea of, just skimming through the material and picking up as much large chunks of uncomposted bedding materials like that. I'm going to see if I could start tailoring the types of beddings that I use, and even the use of bedding at all towards the end, to try to minimize the amount of this stuff that remains in the material. Using it plentifully in the beginning is cool, but towards the end, unless you plan on sifting your castings through, I see the day of the bin's harvest approaching, and I see small stuff like this littered throughout the material as something that might delay that, So if I could just sort of rearrange it so that it's right where the feedings are occurring, pile the stuff up there, it seems like I'm giving it all a much better chance of getting broken down. So the material has got a nice, cool, damp feel to it. Out on the edges, there's a little bit of dryness because the bag itself ventilates, and then around the plastic coverings that I put down, some air gets by. Here I am kind of inadvertently bumping into last week's feeding. And these little white specks. We've been trying to get rid of these white mites out of my bins, especially these two African nightcrawler bins that we're feeding today. And in certain places I was seeing serious infestations of them. It's like here I could see a good number of them laying around within the food supply. I even, tried multiple things, starving the bin, drying the bin, trying to affect the pH level within the bin. It seems like there's very little I could do to control their numbers, although maybe what I'm doing is working because their numbers have drastically reduced over time. But I don't know if that's attestable to what I'm doing or if they're just bugging out on their own. I'm usually much more focused, but for some reason I'm just sort of getting into the picking around in the bin activity. But let's see if we could speed things up here a little bit. We've kind of picked out a bunch of material over here, and we've even salvaged those two pieces of paper that we were using to put out the diatomaceous earth. We'll put that in as bedding under the feeding today too. Maybe I'll try to be a little bit more selective. I think before we put today's feeding in, which we could just put right down the middle again like we did last time. It's my typical feeding pattern, but I don't think it makes much difference where you feed. You could feed anywhere within your bin that you like. Just curious to see larger chunks that survive the breakdown process. This stuff I think was Kohlrabi is the way it's referred to in Hungarian. Really tasty soup green. I know there was a good amount of peels off of that placed into the feeding area last time, which was a week ago. I can see we've got some remnants of it. Maybe it's just a material that takes a little longer to get broken down. Along with it, though, if I'm remembering correctly, there was a whole bunch of carrot peels, too, of which I'm not seeing any signs. Maybe that's just maybe those are just two distinct type of materials that got fed together. One which was able to break down pretty quickly and vanish within a week. And another one that just might need a little bit extra time. But it'll get there. A lot of this even kind of has the shape that it had, you know, the peeled off shape, curled up shape. So it'll all soften up and become gooey, halfway broken down materials that the worms can ingest, but right now it's still a little bit stiff. It does seem like it's emitting moisture and kind of dampening the area down here through the middle where the feedings normally occur. Oops. I'm seeing little specks here and there, you know, I mean, a little piece of whatever. I'm not going to go crazy picking it out. It's just going to go right back in. It's just for the sake of being able to kind of visually see it, or at least maybe whatever, get it in your hand and get a sense of how much it is. That was kind of my only reason to sort of collect it up like that. I'm just curious. But yeah, man, the material in this bin is so nice. It's really got just the right moisture level. I mean, in the past, I would have looked at my glove thinking, man, this stuff is way too sticky and gooey, the way it's adhering to my glove. But the way it all just falls right apart, you know, it seems like it'll all just roll right through your fingers. And for the most part it does, and you can see there's a good amount of residual bedding bits all over the place. Stuff like what we've been collecting as we've been plowing through here. But since this is where the feedings were, obviously we saw perhaps a little bit more worms than we did earlier when we first started searching for scraps. So I don't know what we'll find over on this side. The material is a little bit dry out on the far edges. That's not where the food's been added. But usually that doesn't matter. Usually you'll still find some worms hanging out there. Maybe they go eat, have their fill, and then they just want to go off and do other things, you know, maybe go find a mate and reproduce. So let's see, I don't know, I'm not seeing too much over on this side, a couple scraps here and there, but for the most part it seems almost like all castings, unless I'm just skimming too quickly, or maybe the pieces are pretty small. All right, yeah, very nice. I like what I see. I think it's time to put in today's feeding. We've got a good collection of recyclable bedding materials, maybe even some leftover food to go in there with today's fresh portion. I'm just debating whether I want to add more bedding at this point. I do feel like we've picked out a huge amount of it, and when I look at it relative to how much stuff there is in this bin, if that's all the bedding there is, no, it's not, obviously not. Maybe that accounts for half, right? Maybe all the rest of what's still littered throughout the material would possibly account for just as much as we've collected. So maybe what we've collected is about half of what's still in the bin, which is still not much, gotta admit. That's what I was curious of, whether we were going to find this plum pit. I'm debating whether I want to keep this in here, but whatever, it always kind of ends up back in the feeding area. All right, I think it's time to feed. I'm just really enjoying the texture of this material. It is getting close to that time to start thinking about sowing some seeds for this year's garden. So I'm looking at this stuff thinking, ooh, how nice. But I've got other material already piled up, ready to go. If I had to start today, I could. And then this material could be used for something else in the future. Yeah, you know, in the younger bins, I usually use like a couple coffee filters, pile them full of the fresh food that I've got. But today I'm going to go a little skimpier. I'll just take this one paper towel and use it for my 2 handfuls of food portioning, we've got, it's about a half a handful. I wanted to leave some space in here for this stuff right here. Do I touch it? How do I get it out of here? Let's see. I do have a glove on. It's just kind of nasty. All right. That's about half. We'll save the other half for the other bin that we're feeding, and then we'll be good to go. Alright. Nice generous portion, all stuff that I assume would probably break down pretty quickly. This rice would be white if it didn't have some turmeric seasoning in it. And naturally I already explained what the green color and the white color was, right? I've also got some coffee. I didn't have coffee the last time I fed. People got a little bit thrown off, wondering, hey, where the heck is the coffee? Alright, so let's not forget the leftovers. Almost forgot to toss in these leftovers, including the pit. And I think this bedding material is going to serve a better purpose down here within the food than sitting out there trying to lure insects onto the diatomaceous earth. Here the stuff actually has a chance of maybe getting broken down. Wow, so nice. It feels like what I'm going to be covering up with here is pretty much castings only. I figure if I go a few more feedings and each time I just, take a few extra minutes to try to pick out little bits of material, larger bits, and just over that passage of time too, the stuff will eventually get broken down a little bit here and there too by the worms. I think we're going to end up with a real fine batch of vermicompost here. A little bit more from this side to get things covered up and just to get everything sort of evenly dispersed from a moisture perspective. I did have drier material out on the far edges. I don't want it to blend in with the more damp material, but everything seems to have a good even consistency right now. Nice and flaky, nice and damp, but still very flaky. And still sticking to my glove a little bit, so just a little bit messy, but I'll take it. I'll take it just the way it is. Very nice. Back the way we found it, other than the clear plastic is going to get replaced back with the red translucent plastic. That's actually 2 layers. It's a bag. And I already made sure that the clear plastic has no worms attached to it. I'll just reclaim the few bits of vermicompost that are stuck to it once it has dried. That'll make it much easier for the stuff to just be chipped right off, dumped back in the bin. Alright, very cool. Alright, let's go get the younger African nightcrawler system. Alright, so the younger bin has a larger number of mites bugging around in it, I believe, if I remember correctly. I think a lot of this white stuff we're seeing out here are all mites too. Yeah, this is a pretty good trick, right? Maybe if you've never seen this trick, this is worth mentioning. If you're having trouble picking up a worm, a lot of time you want to pick up a worm, but they feel that what's trying to pick them up isn't like a foreign material. See how the worm pulls back, doesn't allow you to pick it up. If you put a little bit of vermicompost in your hand, they gladly attach themselves to it, and it's almost like a little pickup magnet or something. It just grabs the worm, they attach themselves to it happily, and then you've picked up your worm. So that's just a little trick I figured I'd use on that last little guy that I knew would be hard to pick off. Man, look at these guys. They look pretty content out here. All these little piles of white specks are mites, I know it. A couple feedings ago, it really did seem like I was getting kind of overrun by these little white mites, and I, even took some really close-up video of these little guys. It was time-lapse, so that even though they're very slow movers in the video, when you play back the time-lapse, compressing, maybe an hour worth of activity into just a minute or maybe a few minutes worth of activity down into just a few seconds, the movement of these little guys really comes through. And even though we don't see them moving in normal just observation, when you watch what they've done over the course of time, you could really see them, walking around and doing things. So it's getting harder and harder to handle this piece of paper. It's really falling apart. Oh my goodness. Just feels like it's gonna, yep, I was about to say, it just feels like it's gonna tear under its own weight. And that's what I just had happen over here. I was attempting to, pull the whole thing off in one piece in such a way that maybe we could still lay it out one last time across the top of the surface as a single sheet of paper, sort of. And then maybe the next time we feed this bin, we'll just use that stuff as bedding. Oh my goodness. This is a younger bin, so I'm not going to go so crazy trying to work the material down. And I think, if we see some bedding, we could certainly stack it up and try to put it where we know the action's going to be, where the feeding's going to occur. So that's what I'm doing over here. The piece of paper that we saw down the middle was a it was a coffee filter. It was just attempting to show where the last feeding occurred. And to come to think of it, this feeding indicator was meant for the VermiBag Tote that we just fed with the other African nightcrawlers in it. So I just put that over there to remind me to go back in under there and mark where we last fed with one of these. But you saw what happened with the other one that was in here, indicating where we last fed. The thing was gobbled up. It was pretty much gone, so it's here in little scraps now. But we'll use this fresh one to show where we last fed after we're finished. I'm pretty sure this is a chunk of avocado, pretty much broken down because it's so soft and crumbly. What's this? Yeah, I remember now. It's coming back to me. When I fed these bits of vegetable, the ones we threw into the older bin, the bin that we want to see come to the finish line sooner, didn't have anything like the hard stem of the vegetables, or I've got a couple roots in here too, I believe. I tried to put all the thinner, finer type things into that older bin in the hopes that they would actually break down a little bit more quickly. But here I put things that I thought might take a little bit longer, things like these stems, because I think there's going to be a little bit more time in here in this bin. But let's not go too crazy here. I still like to kind of get a sense of how they've done on the last feeding, so if I see large bits, maybe I'll just set them aside. We'll just aerate the whole feeding area while we're at it. Or maybe not so much. I don't want to disrupt things that are still seemingly intact. And like, for example, right here, we could still see, it's full of castings and a few worms. So you can see that they've been in here doing their work. But they're not quite done. There's still things in here that are still being broken down. But this is still kind of a complete little food bundle from last time. I think that just means we're going to see a second one, because I usually put two in. It's an avocado pit. Ooh. Sometimes you handle one of these avocado pits and it feels like it's such a tough, hard substance, but after a few weeks in the bin, it softens up and you can actually start to manipulate it. And you can see one of them I was able to break pretty easily. The other one feels a little bit more stiff, but we'll keep it there in the feeding area. So it's going to get a lot of attention there. So here's the second feeding bundle again, with some leftovers in it. So, once again, it's the same stuff that I knew might take a little while, especially parts like this, the roots. See a couple worms are hanging out on it. But I somehow felt like those stems and the roots would be a little bit tougher, so I anticipated that they would take longer in this bin. And in this bin, they'll have the time they need to break down, because this is a younger bin. It'll be around for a little bit longer. So the previous feeding zone looks pretty good. Kind of what I expected. Breaking down the material nicely. The material seems a little drier in here. Here's what a stem starts to look like after a while, after the worms have had their work at it. They just nibble it down gradually. does feel like this bin could actually benefit from a little bit of moisture. It seems almost drier than the other container. But we are covering with plastic. It should be keeping the majority of the moisture in the bin. There's another little chunk of something. It's got a whole bunch of mites zipping around on it. It almost looks like sesame seeds. Maybe smaller than sesame seeds. And you know, I wasn't really paying attention because I was just rummaging sort of rapidly. But now that I'm sort of thinking about it, it does seem like they're pretty much scattered all over the place. But I mean, when I would come in here in the past, I would open the thing up and I would, you know, see them swarming a really delicious, sweet piece of fruit or something. So I'm wondering if we could be a little bit selective in today's feeding too, because their numbers do seem to be gradually dropping. And that's what I'd like to try to continue with if possible. So maybe what I did last time was I fed stuff that wasn't very sugary, very sweet. These are just like cuttings off the peeled vegetable, and with carrots too. I think, okay, carrots are a little bit sweeter. Probably a little bit more something that the mites might really, really enjoy. But here's another pit. Perhaps I could put in sort of bland stuff that might not really attract the attention of the mites. And if they're going to be around, kind of scattered throughout the bin a little bit, that's fine. But I just don't want to see them mobbing any one particular food item, like you see sometimes if you have a really tasty item. So I feel like if I put this apple in here, this thing will probably be covered in mites. Same with the banana peel, you know. So that's why I'm thinking, here, I've got another paper towel. It's already got some chunks of broccoli bits on it. But we'll tear this one in half and try to use it for 2 handfuls. And if I pick down past my banana peels and stuff, I've got some sort of bland looking things here. I think this was the same stuff that was peeled, but after it was cooked and removed from the soup. There again, it's just there for the flavor. I hope it's not a piece of apple. It's so hard to tell stuff that's when it's frozen like this. I think it's a coral rob, but it's the stuff that already came out of the soup once the soup was done. All right. Let's try to grab some similar stuff here too. This is an interesting item. This is the avocado. Same thing, avocado pits. But when it was still fresh, I was able to slice it and chop it up into small pieces. Well, I went rummaging through looking for other pieces of that, but I couldn't find any. So I know I've already fed it to other bins, the sliced up avocado pits. So we'll get to see how they progress. I don't think we'll bump into it again here. I got a feeling it's going to get gobbled up. Now that it's really exposed just like this, it's just not a big, round, tough object anymore. It's just a very small, vulnerable piece of material now. All right. These were mango seed husks. And here too, it's a very tough material, but it bends really easily. I could probably tear it. Maybe not. It's still kind of tough. We can hear it cracking too. This stuff is eventually going to go too. It just takes a little while. So I've got some nice leftover bits here. I'm going to start scattering back in. And before we cover up with coffee, yeah. Oh, see, here's one of the coffee filters that I was going to try to keep semi-intact. Here's another one. At least this one sort of stayed intact. But let's get all this random material back in here. I know this bin's over 100 days old too, but not as old as the VermiBag Tote that we fed earlier. But it too is coming along quite nicely. So I shouldn't take for granted the fact that this one's going to need to be harvested at some point soon too. And then it might not hurt to take some similar considerations into account. But yeah, you gotta admit, it looks really nice. I could feel all kinds of chunks of stuff as I pick through as a piece of bedding. everywhere there's just a chunk of leftover food, scrap, kind of gooey stuff. So even though it all has like a really nice, dark, consistent color to it, you might think that it's a whole bunch of castings already, but and it is. It's just the castings are covering all the stuff that still needs to be broken down. So what, we didn't even look. The material down here is a little bit more damp and dense, I think. I got the impression over on this side that the material was maybe a little bit dry. But we're just aerating it here, getting it all the little air pockets down into the material, and little channels for the worms to be able to move around through as well. All kinds of little bits of this and that everywhere. Oh my goodness, I almost forgot. And I wanted to use coffee too. It's a good thing I didn't start covering up, you know. Usually once I got the plastic covers on, it's at that point I don't let myself go back to try to recover from spacing out and forgetting to do things, but it was still early enough that I think we could still rip the feeding area open so we could plop in a couple more things that we wanted to include. So that really makes it into a good generous feeding. Pretty sure we're going to find leftovers in here if we come back a week from now. Maybe we don't need to come back so soon. Maybe we can give these guys a little bit of time to work this stuff down. Trying to get this feeding area covered up nicely. I usually try to go for sort of level, but here I feel like I've got a little bit of a mound in the middle, because I know I've got a lot of stuff down in here for them. It'll be interesting to see. I'm sure by the next time we come in here it'll be at least level, but at least collapsed, if nothing else. Alright, we're almost done. Let's get this thing back on here as one piece if possible. Let's see if that is possible. I'm not a big fan of seeing these little white dots out here. I think if things were allowed to get a little bit more dry in this bin, maybe they'd vanish. I'm debating whether I want to keep the plastic covering, or maybe it is time to let this bin dry off a little bit and try to get rid of the mites. That was really the first thing I tried originally, trying to dry these bins off, trying to let them air out so there was no plastic covering them. There was just this piece of paper. And then I started trying to withhold feedings and trying to adjust the pH level in the bins. So you know what? I'm going to live with the mites. I'm going to let them be. I'm just going to cover up again with plastic the way I've been doing. And we'll deal with it later. Alright, I did forget something again, didn't I? Always forgetting something. I'll slip it in. My feeding zone indicator. Alright. In a number of my bins I've been feeding on the corners, and just to remind myself that I'm still feeding down the middle in these African nightcrawler systems, I have adopted the use of marking where I last fed in most of my bins nowadays. Just for the fun of it, actually, because it's always easy enough to find where you last fed. Well, that's it, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please let me know. Let me know by giving me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.